Well, all right, all right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is John Henry Soto. Welcome to Counterparts. And as always, George Batista is here with us. And we're very excited today. We have a wonderful guest on. We're going to be talking about health and children and nutrition. And it's going to be a wonderful conversation. So we're really looking forward to getting going. Before we start, George, you want to tell us a little bit about our guests?
Absolutely, absolutely. So today we're going to be talking to Dr. Michelle Perro. And Dr. Perro has 40 years of pediatric experience, including emergency medicine, hospital and urgent care, and integrative medical practices in city and suburban settings. She's worked internationally. She's been listed on one of America's top 10 pediatricians by Consumer Reports, 2006 to 2012. She is the co-founder and executive director of GMO Science, which is a website dedicated to the science of GMOs and their associated pesticides with a lens on health. And more recently, she's co-written a book actually called "What's Making Our Children Sick: How Industrial Food is Causing an Epidemic of Chronic Illness and What Parents and Doctors Can Do About It." So we're very, very excited to have her on this program.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Michelle Perro to the show.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for doing this. George, I know you want, I'm going to turn it over to you to start.
Absolutely. So where I wanted to start was, one of the reasons and one of the big reasons why we brought you on here, because we wanted your insights on a lot of this. Now, John and I grew up together, cousins. We were always into health and fitness. That was one of our priorities in our life. We worked out together for many, many years and took supplements. And even though half the time we didn't know what we were doing, but we wanted to stay healthy no matter what. So we always shared this passion for health. Now, and once we became parents, then the question became, how do we raise a healthy child in this environment, right? With all the pollution and all the GMOs and that type of stuff. So it was a big question, and I'm sure it's a question that a lot of parents that who are new parents, or even if they're going to become parents, I'm sure that's a question that they have. So your information is going to be really valuable to those folks who, especially with younger children, as well as my daughter's 15. But you know what? I've tried to raise her as healthy as possible, and John's the same way. We did our best we can, but we really want to get your insights on this. So before we go into all that, first, for those who are not familiar with your work, talk a little bit about your practice, how you started, and how it's evolved over time.
Thank you. I'll be brief, because when you've been doing it for 40 years, boy, there are stories to share. Boots on the ground. So I'm a clinician, which means I don't work with lab rats. I actually work with children, and I even examine them. Indeed. And so children don't even get touched these days. It's crazy.
Right.
I started mostly as a pediatric emergency physician. My roots are also in New York City, Bellevue, NYU, Metropolitan Hospital. I did all that.
Wow.
Yeah, I was there. And then I came out to California, Beach Boys, all that. So I've been here ever since. But what happened was I had my own son, and I was already a pediatric emergency physician working in an Oakland Children's Hospital. And I had a serendipitous encounter with a homeopath. And through her assistance, she was an MD. She's still practicing, an MD homeopath. She helped me with my son. And from when I saw my son get better with homeopathy, which according to mainstream medicine is voodoo, snake oil, placebo, $7, your kid can be fixed, over the counter remedy. Did it a few times, and I only needed it twice to see, like, oh my God, you've got to be freaking kidding me.
Wow.
So I studied homeopathy at night online at a school in London, had raised small kids, was running a practice, soccer mom, the usual crazy life. And then I evolved into health advocacy regarding environmental toxicants, GMOs, and pesticides via a mom in the practice where I was working, and trying to stop the spray of pesticides, being introduced to GMOs and pesticides, and correlating this is early 2000s, with what I was starting to see in children, which was this shocking exponential rise in chronic disease and disorders, many beginning with the gut. And that took me on that journey. And I've had a million turnoffs and everything since then. But that gives you the idea, as many of us, through my own family, my own experience, and a little bit of luck, was on the path to where I am now. And we can talk about it later. I think
Wow.
that's enough. But you get the
Right, right, sure.
story.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I did want to actually just ask you, did you have any resistance early on when you decided to look into the voodoo?
You see, there's a hammer hit my head. Yeah, let me tell you, from the most benign, which was the eye roll, my colleagues just, giving the eye roll. I got a
Oh,
lot
God.
of eye rolling, to frank hostility,
Wow.
to some people not wanting even to talk to me about it because they were just so
Right.
triggered by my believing in this magic, even though there are major countries all over the world that just about only use
Right.
homeopathy,
Mhm.
not to mention MDs, et cetera, et cetera. And not just those other countries or those third world countries. I'm talking like a third of German physicians use
Mhm.
homeopathy. The Queen of England used homeopathy. But anyway, it's not a defense on homeopathy. But also, what that did was marginalize me in my community, that I became the other.
Oh, wow.
And
Mhm.
so I've been doing homeopathy, let's say almost 30 years now in my practice, of 40, three-quarters of my career. And so, which plays well into what's going on now
Right.
in, the
Yeah.
various COVID issues, which we can talk about or not. But what it did was create me as a peripheral being, which was okay because, I'm from the Lower East Side, New York. I was kind of tough. And so I was like, I'm not going to give up what I believe in, what I know works, and what's easy for children. I'm going to have to stand by this. And I did. And I've been doing it ever since. And I've had amazing results with it. And families love it.
Yeah.
That's
That's
great, great. One of the things that you said that hit with me, and it's that approach that you have where you're actually examining the child, and it hits with me because it's interesting. My daughter's pediatrician. We drive 2 hours to go see him every year, and the reason is because he's an old school pediatrician. He's from the islands actually, so it does exactly that. My daughter's 15 years old, still examines her, the glands and the stomach, and does the whole thing, recommends the fruits and vegetables, recommends the exercise, will not use medication unless it's absolutely necessary, because he believes in that way of doing things. And you're not seeing that nowadays.
Indeed. So hold on to that guy. He sounds like a gem. And
Yes.
honestly, I gave a talk recently for the Hasidic community in New York about some issues. And, I will speak to whatever community needs assistance.
Mhm.
And this was a very delightful community. But what I was beginning to realize, making a recommendation in that community, I had a hard time recommending pediatricians. And I know that sounds incredibly outrageous and egregious, but I'm
wow.
not sure that my comrades, the people I am honored to be a pediatrician, I took that oath with full seriousness, are really doing the best by children. And what I mean by that is many people have fallen into the belief that there's better living through science and the technocracy, that if they do the on the computer all day, just getting
Right.
the right labs and plugging in online and getting everything dropped on, in our health records, online health records when they have to be dropped. That's more important than actually looking at the patient. So the art of the exam is being decimated.
Right.
It's for the love of the technocracy. I have seen doctors not even look up when I've been in their exam room as me as a human. They're so focused on the screen.
Right.
And there's a lot you can learn from touching a patient.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It,
And so I say, stick with that guy.
Absolutely.
it's almost like they're taking out of the humanity out of out of the whole process, which to
Yeah.
me is it's exactly what it should be, the opposite of that. One of my experiences, I have two children. My daughter is 11 today, as a matter of fact. It's her birthday.
Happy
Oh,
birthday.
happy birthday.
Yeah, and my son is 5. And when my son was about 2 years old, he developed his knees got really swollen to the point where he couldn't stand. He was crying and he couldn't stand or take a step. So we, of course, we freaked out. We didn't know what was going on. We took him to the hospital, and they were checking him and doing probing and probing and all that. And a doctor came in, and I'm not making this up, but it was about a doctor and like couple other people, and she says, she was saying that it was
Rheumatoid arthritis.
arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis,
Nope.
and she said, in my heart of hearts, I believe that that's what it is. She said, in my heart of hearts. And I was just like, how about just like medicine stuff? Like, is there a test that you can show that? And then they gave us these medicines, and it just made things worse. He got really feverish. He got like, it was just really, really bad. So luckily for us, we found, my wife was very persistent in finding someone. So we found someone down in Clearwater, Florida, who was um, um, a functional medicine doctor, and he was in New Jersey actually, but he was down in Florida. We went to go see him in New Jersey, and he actually did about 30 or 40 different tests, blood tests and everything, and found out that he didn't have that at all. He had it was a gut, like you mentioned earlier. It was actually a bacterial infection that he had in his gut.
Probably salmonella. Yep.
Yeah, and we addressed that, and he's cured. Like, it took about 7 months, and it was challenging because he couldn't eat certain things, and he didn't understand at that point. He was only three, about 2.5 years old, and but he was cured, and that for me was just like, okay, well, that's it. My son got cured because of these natural medicines, or these natural supplements. And what's your, when somebody comes, a parent who's been like completely consumed with medicine and doctors, and this is, the doctor knows all, and when you're in front of them and you have to talk to them about what you actually have observed and have studied, do you have pushback on that from certain parents, implementing that,
Um,
educating anyway?
yes and no. It depends. It depends on the area that you're located in, the age of the parents, and how many kids they have, because they're not all created equal. So when they're younger parents and they're not very experienced and they're part of the millennial generation and they're totally bought into devices, a lot of those folks, and I hate to, kind of generalize because there's so many individuals, but they kind of know everything, Dr.
Right.
Google. So they
Right.
looked
Right.
everything up, and by the time they come see you, they've researched the heck out of everything. They have all the answers. So you get everything from that to people who just want to be cared for, to people who just want a pill for ill. Give me the pill. I'm busy, mom. I don't want to deal. I don't want to do all the work. So you have all kinds, like different kind of three big groups, if I had to say. So, but when I start working with families and what I did for many, many, many years is complex chronically ill children. So after my acute care journey, I started focusing on chronically ill kids, autism, Lyme, more autism, more Lyme, asthma, etc. And so what I would tell folks is, you're going to do all the work. I'm just going to create the algorithm and the plan for you. And what I would always tell families, a couple things. Number one is, they would often say to me, you say my child has Lyme disease. The Mayo Clinic said that there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. I've heard that. And I'd say, well, okay, I'm not asking you to believe me, but you are responsible for steering your own family. So in your family, why don't you try these things 4 weeks? You don't see a change, I'm a quack, say goodbye. And I won't even charge you for the visit.
Wow.
So I'd say, you do it, see what happens.
Wow.
I would say that. And there was one more thing I would say. I'd say, if you're not going to change your diet, we can't work together.
Right.
Wow.
So just about every kid I see, especially now, needs a dietary overhaul.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, talk about how the GMO issue is affecting our children now, and tie it in with the guts and how it's all, how this is all happening.
It's a big conversation, but I'm going to try to give you like the thumbnail,
Sure.
synopsis of
Sure.
it, because we could speak like a couple of days on this.
Right.
In essence, when they got introduced, was about two and a half decades ago, 1996 to 1998, what that enabled them to do was to grow crops that wouldn't die when they sprayed herbicides, Roundup
Right.
ready crops.
Right.
And the main crops were soy, corn, canola, and now there are a host of others, and the technology's gotten more advanced. But simultaneous, while that was happening, the weeds that were supposed to be sensitive to this Roundup were not. And so we developed massively, quickly weed resistance. And what that did was force these companies, Monsanto, now Bayer, Dow, Syngenta, others, to make more toxic solutions, more tiered genes, and kids are now even exposed at a greater rate. They started using the chemicals off label, like to dry crops out. They're used as a desiccant. And so that's what began to happen. They also told us that, many of these products wouldn't hurt us, be like glyphosate-based herbicides. That's what's in Roundup. Glyphosate is because it only affects plants. But what they didn't tell us is that the same system used in plants is used by our microbiome. It's called the shikimate pathway. So what glyphosate-based herbicides actually do is that they alter our microbiome. They bind up our minerals. They alter up our immune function. Now, you don't need a GMO without its pesticides. GMOs in themselves cause issues as well. They cause issues on immune system, liver, kidney, and that was shown in the very first study of GMOs by a scientist named Dr. Pusti, who actually passed away 2 months ago. And after he reported his research, it was in the UK at the Rowan Institute, he was fired, and his story is pretty horrific. So they've been obfuscating the truth. This is right out of the Monsanto Bayer playbook, and other things are very synonymous. Now what's going on is what happened then, and they hid the truth. So what they also don't tell you is you just don't eat one pesticide. You eat many on these crops. They have not studied the toxic chemical soup and the effect on our children's health. So it's making our children sick. Mostly it's food, but it's because of environmental toxicants. Pesticides are number one, but it's not just pesticides. There are about 6 major groups of environmental disasters that are now affecting our children.
Wow.
So you
Ooh, ah.
Well, yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
Oh gosh, I mean these are, and George and I have we've had these conversations, obviously not as articulate as you are with but we know what's happening, we read about what's happening, and it's the education, the raising of awareness is really, it gets squashed. It's like you can't even, like, for example, like this show right now that we usually go live. It's hard for us to go live on a show where we're talking about some of these issues because we'll get blocked, or they'll take our show off of YouTube, whatever it is. And do you, and I know you wrote a book. Can you talk a little bit about what's in the book, what's making our children sick?
Absolutely. So I wrote this book a couple of years ago with an amazing medical anthropologist from UCSF, Dr. Adams. And when we first started working together, she didn't believe any of this, what was making her children sick. And she gave me a lot of pushback, and in a good way. And so then invited her to the clinic, and she sat in with me on about 20 patient interviews. By like the third, I think she got it. By the 20th, she was 180 degrees, about face, and a believer. Wow. And so we wrote about 10 of my patients. These are people I was treating at the time on a variety of disorders, and how I, with the families, was able to reshape, improve their health. We picked, of course, the success stories. I didn't include the ones that didn't go so well. They all don't go great. Some don't. This is life. Mm-hmm. And so we did all that. But the idea was to use what happened to my patients' children, global children, through the effects of industrial food-like products, because we're not eating food now. We eat these industrialized products on our children's health. Right. And boy, I mean, there is a lot of information out there now on what these GMOs and pesticides do to our children. We've known about it since Rachel Carson and DDT, and even before that. Right. So this idea that pesticides harm us is far from new. We've known it for about 80 years, right. But yet we cannot seem to end the pesticide parade of what our children are exposed to. As a matter of fact, there was a whole big recent, I want to call it a scandal, about what was in baby food, those little jars of baby food, both organic and inorganic, right. Regular, conventional,
Mhm.
not with chemicals, and the various heavy metals in those baby foods like arsenic, lead, etc. And so regular pediatricians, mainstream medicine, I'll call it mainstream, they don't look for those things necessarily, like the heavy metals, and it's in their food. So here, parents are spending a lot of money trying to buy organic food, and that's not even good enough. Got to go back to the kitchen. Make your own food is what I tell folks. No processed food. Like just give it up, grow your own. But so it's really hard. We have to go back to the ways of maybe not our parents, but our grandparents.
Right.
And
Right.
in some cases, you guys look kind of young. Our great grandparents,
Right.
um, on how they did things. There has to be the better living through science. Sure, the technocracy, not so much. Food is best from soil that is nutritious, chemically free, balanced microbiome, because our gut health is synonymous with soil health.
Mhm.
Healthy soil, carbon capture, regeneration. And that's actually some of the stuff I'm working on now. So
Yeah.
that's a long answer to how that book was born. And, I'm working on the second book right now, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's great.
Oh,
Well, I'm definitely
fantastic.
gonna pick that up for sure. My grandparents, my grandma never. I was raised by my grandparents mostly, and she never ate out. She always cooked. She lived to be 96. My
Yeah.
grandfather was 95. And my mother, tragically, she was a different generation, and she just ate whatever she wanted to eat. And she passed at 64, which was pretty young, very young. um, and you know that to me is the biggest conversation and the scariest conversation, because I feel helpless, and as a parent, and we're trying to. I do cook a lot here. We do a lot of cooking. We buy our fruits and vegetables, but where are we getting our fruits and vegetables from? We're only getting them from the supermarket, and it says organic on it, but I don't really know if they're really organic. The best way to do it is to, like you said, get that soil and grow your own food.
Right.
And you said you're working on that as well. Like that's something that you're working on right now, because that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, what has happened, I am, and as I've been really leaving from clinical practice after 40 years, I've done more nonprofit since about 2014, and I'm more into teaching, reaching bigger audiences,
Hmm.
because I want to be able to teach what I've learned, rather than when I become compost, the whole thing goes with me. So what I'm working on now is a wonderful project, and hopefully we're going to be launching in a couple of months. You guys are the first to hear about it, and it's part of Regeneration International, which is a well-established 25-year website, 400 partners on regenerative farming, offsetting climate change and carbon capture through regenerative agriculture.
Wow.
We joined up with them. Our subgroup is called Regeneration Health International, and what we are is focused on food as medicine, and we're doing that in response to what's happening. Hippocrates said food is medicine. We didn't invent that.
Mhm.
But what we're doing is offering parents, eaters, consumers, this is not for scientists, this is for regular folks, a way how you figure out how to embrace your health. And I did this in response to what happened during COVID, when I saw certain narratives being promoted without healthy food being promoted as a way
Yes.
to boost immunity. Where's the
Exactly.
food narrative? People are eating
Unbelievable.
like Doritos and Coca-Cola. Well, hey, that's not going to help you fend off COVID or whatever next pandemic is coming. So that was a whoa. I mean, I knew it, but it was like, it hit me hard that, okay, what can we do to offer people for free, no charge, a program? And I'm working on the content literally as we speak.
Wow.
That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, one of the things that I talk about on my show, because I do a show about health and nutrition, and one of the things that I talk about is taking responsibility for your health, and how important nutrition really is to this whole thing. And whether, I talked about, even during the pandemic, same type of thing, boosting your immune system, doing everything you can to put the odds in your favor, right? Now, when it comes to a couple, let's say, that wants to have a child, How important is the nutrition even at that level when the child is in the womb, and having that nutrition already even before the child is actually born?
George, boy, you read my mind, or you looked at my agenda because I'm doing that talk next week on pre-pregnancy.
Oh
Really?
wow.
Okay.
The days where you kind of have a little honeymoon, a little romp, and you make a baby, that's over.
Right.
That's so 20th century.
Mhm.
So now, if you're parents to be, you need to start planning, in theory, a year before, 6 months at the latest, doing mom and partner. I don't say dad. I don't even want to say mom.
Mhm.
Parent one, parent two,
Right.
whatever that looks like, whatever permutation it is, go on with your bad self. Whatever you got to do, you do it. But usually there's two parents or more that whoever's involved with that creation of sperm and egg needs to clean up before. And we offer programs now on how you do it. But if a parent says to be, I don't have a program, they need to one switch to organic food. They will clear within 2 weeks the pesticide is out of their body. Big study out of Indiana a couple of years ago, women who had high levels of pesticides, super high rate of miscarriages and babies with not great outcomes. So we have that data. So one, switch to organic and do the best you can. Get off of processed food.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's processed or organic. And do you have to be 100% perfect? No, I understand there's a party at Aunt Sue's or whatever's going on. Okay, fine. But for the most part, you need to be organic and eating non-processed foods. Why is that? Processed foods contain preservatives, and there are chemicals in there that are not so great for the fetus. And three, if you're going to do any detoxing, clearing of whatever is in your own body, do it then. You cannot start detoxing once you're pregnant. It must be done at that even might be too close, 3 to 6 months before conception. And
Wow.
lastly, what I tell folks is clean up your emotional baggage.
Right.
The emotional effect on health is massive. Emotional health, spiritual health, stress, etc. Get your stuff in check. Air out and clean up your relationship, your own childhood wounds. Time to sort that through. And because those will continue on. And that emotional trauma that you may have experienced needs to be looked at, dealt with, begin the healing before you have a baby.
Yeah.
Because it's going to carry on with you.
Absolutely. They have I know I've read studies in the past, especially regarding epigenetics, when they talk about the stress of the parent, how it affected the baby, and then when the baby was born, and then when they studied that child throughout life, that child was so filled with anxiety and how they handled issues and stuff like that. So I when I read that, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it.
And
There's transgenerational trauma. That's what we call it. And it's inherited. And, a lot of these traumas that many of our parents and grandparents too, great grandparents have experienced, war, famine, pick it, whatever it is, we've inherited, we pass it on through epigenetics. So genes don't change, but your
Right.
epigenes do.
Right.
And those epigenes can be influenced by environmental factors, food, water, air, etc., and through various chemical processes called methylation.
Mhm.
So I do a lot of using certain supplements to support pregnancy. One of methylated products, methyl B12, methylfolate, to help them because it alters the gene expression through epigenetics.
Right.
So we bring these conversations in, and people say, oh, I can change. Not only can you change, you can change your epigenome, you can change your microbiome, you can change your positive thinking, which will then change your epigenome and your microbiome. And your microbiome, what does that do? It makes the neurotransmitters that affect your mental health. Your microbiome, what does it do? It supports your immune system because most of your immune system comes from your gut.
Right.
So people, when we start to teach these things, can you imagine? I wish I knew this when I was out there doing it. I've acquired this later on my own. Wasn't exactly taught in medical school. So this is what we're teaching parents so they can have the best outcome. Treating autism is a drag. You can prevent it.
Yeah. That's amazing. The tragedy of it is I grew up in the South Bronx, where this education is just not even, it's not there now, let alone when I grew up in the 70s and 80s. it certainly wasn't anything there. And um, do you see how would this translate? How would this translate in an educational road to something like that, to inner city, or to kind of educating mothers, that fatherless mothers, like my mom,
Mhm.
or my, yeah, I didn't have a dad, right? So she was basically by herself, and then she remarried, and but there was no education there that she had food wise. I ate at my grandma's, and my grandma would just make stuff from scratch. But what education are we? How are we phrasing, this conversation?
It's interesting you should ask that question because I've kind of struggled with this because a lot of this stuff we're talking about seems to fall upon a certain academic and educational society,
Right.
Right,
and it
Yeah.
becomes privileged information and
Right.
people more with
right,
access and income. And it's not necessarily a color thing, but it's an access and it's a financial thing. Whoever has access through certain channels. And that never sat well with me. And for example, here in our community, I've done different talks for different communities locally, but we don't get big draw. So you have to go where people go.
yeah,
You have to make the information presented in a way that's digestible for them, not being, kind of, in putting down people if their academic level is not at a certain level. You can
right,
package material for an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old, or a 49-year-old, and you can give the same great information. You just have to simplify it to wherever somebody is, either linguistically or academically. It can be done, but you have to go where they go.
right.
And where is that? Supermarkets, clinics, parks, where are they going? And
Mhm.
that's where you have to put the information. Also, or what kind of radio are they listening to? Everyone's got their phone with them. They're on those phones nonstop. So the way we want to do it, even on our website, RHI, is in very brief little videos.
Hmm.
And I've even done this on my GMO science channel. I did little short hits, little videos that people can watch, and then getting them out to various communities in different languages, and making them language accessible, whatever language you need to translate them into. So meet people where they're at. So, for example, here in my area in San Francisco, they have a farmer's market, and whatever they take left over, they bring it for free the next day and put it out at a farmer's market in the Mission, which is a heavily Latino population. What they do in that area, though, is they give little food cards. They tell people how to make that. They show them some collard greens, like people look like I don't know what to do with that, and they show them what to do.
Oh, that's
We're
cool.
not taught what do you do with
Right.
collard greens?
Right, right.
What's the best way to eat broccoli? All that. So that's what you have to do, but doable. And we are doing it. We're
Yeah,
making shows like yours accessible to different communities in small sound bites.
yeah,
People don't have a lot of time. You got to make it
Right.
sharp.
yeah.
Exactly.
And it's definitely an educational quest. I mean, that is really what it is. And these sound bites, you're right, because I mean, I work in social media now. That's my job. So the sound bites, 30 seconds, 1 minute, usually impinges really, really strong, especially if it has a message of something as important as this. Parents with kids, something like this, boom, that's like really a powerful thing. So I love hearing that. That's great.
A lot of that education where it used to be passed on in families is gone because families are not intact. So when
Yeah.
families lived in community, grandma would teach auntie, would teach mom, would teach dad, and it was often along the women's line. But
Mhm.
when the women left the family, went back to work in the 60s in America, um, who marketed families? The first one was Kentucky Fried Chicken, followed by McDonald's.
Jeez.
Wow.
So women left, right? Because when women were in the home as homemakers, it was different. But women went to work in World War II, and then when the guys came home from the war, they got booted out of the factories where they were working, back into the homes. They became homemakers, and then in the 60s, there was the movement of women. So oftentimes, food movements are correlated to cultural movements. Went back into the workforce, and fast food came in as mom.
Wow.
Wow. That's
I'm
incredible.
sure that was somewhat by design, and I'll, I'll, I'll be the first conspiracy person to say it.
Not to and not to go through conspiracy necessarily, but what do you feel that childhood vaccination has can have a health impact, especially regarding autism and that type of thing?
It's interesting about because the vaccination thing, I believe in the principle of vaccination. I don't believe what's happened to vaccination.
Mhm.
So in principle, I believe it's a great
Right.
principle because
Right.
homeopathy is very close to how vaccination
Right.
works. But what happened to vaccination is a very disturbing thing, because in 1986, the government basically handed over to big pharma a ticket for indemnity, lack of culpability. When they did that, they no longer were responsible or as concerned of what that they put in those vaccines,
Right.
and they were given license to put in whatever they want. So I'm not as much concerned as the principal vaccinology, but the added the special sauce, I call it.
Yeah.
What else is in there? And the other stuff's in there is harmful to children. So is it the actual microbial particle in there, or what they put in there to increase the immune response? And that's what I have a problem with.
Right.
The terminology anti-vax to me was created in some PR lab, for millions of dollars. That's an awful word used to marginalize a segment of society that questions. I question everything. I not only question vaccines, I question Tylenol. I question a lot of things that we do that are supposedly okay for children that I don't think are. And so I have a lot of questions. I question the adjuvants, that's what they're called, that are put in vaccines, and definitely, without a doubt in my mind, they've been definitely causative of disease. So, like what? There are, for example, there are heavy metals in there.
Mhm.
There's formaldehyde. According to the inventor of the polio vaccine, his name is Dr. Maurice Hillebrand, they are contaminated with other viruses. And in 2017, a paper came out from Italy, a Dr. Gotti, which showed that via electron microscopy that 43 out of 44 vaccines were contaminated with metals. And I'm not talking about like magnesium and zinc, those are metals, but like lead, cadmium, tungsten, tin, or contaminated vaccines. Now, they use this nanotechnology now with very small particles.
Right.
That nanotechnology crosses the blood-brain barrier. Coincidentally, we have an pandemic of neurocognitive dysfunction in children. So whether it's autism, ADHD, all kinds of neurosensory disorders that kids now have. So if you really tell me that you want to protect children, then everything should be stopped and evaluated.
Mhm.
I'm not making a judgment whether it's this or that. You hold everything that could potentially exacerbate a neurocognitive disorder, whether it's Tylenol or a vaccine or whatever it is. A food, glyphosate, in a paper that came out in 2019, showed how it caused autism. The mechanism was laid out. And glyphosate can shuttle aluminum 6 different ways across the blood-brain barrier. So when I see that, when you say children are being damaged, 1 in 33 kids now is on the spectrum, autism spectrum. When I was a resident, it was 1 in 10,000. So if you want to talk about pandemics, let's talk about that pandemic,
Right.
because
Yeah.
autism is very challenging for families. Let's see, and then we can really sort out what toxicants are affecting our children's brain function. Then I'll talk pandemic with you.
Right.
Wow. Unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, and you said, you highlighted one thing in there towards the beginning that really hits me as well, is the asking the questions, is and that's one thing that people don't do. And I even people in my family, I'm sometimes a pain when, whether it's my child's doctor or even my doctor or whatever. I constantly ask questions. I don't accept things just blindly. And if I need a second opinion, I'll go get a second opinion. But the point is, I always tell my wife and even my daughter, I say, it needs to make sense, or they need to show you how it makes sense. If if they're going to give my child something, I want to know why you're giving my child something and how it's going to affect that. You are the medical professional. You should know what's going on. This is why I'm bringing my child to you. Parents, in it's amazing how many parents these days don't do that. They just say, here you go, here's my child, give him whatever you need to give him, and we're done. And it drives me nuts.
I think that the challenge is you can't question anything without being attacked by some
Well, right,
group.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
that to me is really where it gets, where it gets scary. Like I don't even talk about this in public, but my 2 kids are not vaccinated at all, not one.
Wow.
And have they've been fine, other than my son that had that issue that we that it's cured. My daughter is fine, and we've never had any issue. As a matter of fact, their immune systems are so strong. I mean, my daughter will get like a cold which will last maybe 12 hours, maybe, and she'll just get,
Mhm.
and then the next day she'll be fine. My son is the same way. But having that conversation, like if I go to the park or something and parents are talking and they're like, yeah, I just, there's 40, what is it, 40 vaccinations that we're giving kids now. I mean, what? For what? I had 5. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Me
I
too.
had 5,
Right.
Mhm.
and so that to me is where I think the questioning is, where people get scared. They're like,
Yes.
I'm going to be attacked by all these soccer moms here in the park, and that's dangerous.
Well, fear, there's been a great campaign on generating fear, fear to
Oh,
get people to do what you say, generate more fear. And there's just, you just promote one narrative. And if kids aren't healthier, they can get sicker for sure,
uh-huh.
being they are unhealthier. American children, 1 out of 2 of them has a chronic disease. So they're definitely unhealthier. But indeed, for those of us who question anything, we're labeled as anti-science.
Yeah.
So this idea of using language as a force to attack us,
Right.
for questioning anything, using this anti-language. Oh, you're anti-vax, you're anti-this, you're
Or
anti-science,
misinformation or
Yeah.
some.
misinformation. It's like, no, I'm not anti-anything. I'm pro-child. So if it's going to help the children, let's look at it and see how it actually does that in a really kind of reasonable, intelligent conversation. Show me the numbers, show me the data, but I just don't want to see data. Do you actually care for children? Like, if you're one of these
Right.
folks who are just looking at lab rats, well, that's great. But, like, do you actually care for children? Are you on the front line? Oh, you haven't cared for a child in 20 years? I'm not sure that you're the person I want to talk to. I want to talk to folks with boots on the ground who actually seen kids and examine them and work with families. Because a lot of this stuff to me is otherwise, I don't really have time for what you have to say. You don't have experience. You
Right.
don't know.
Right.
You really don't know. So that is my own bias. I'm a snob when it comes to that. I want to talk to folks who really have walked the walk in
Right.
terms of really caring for families. And so yes, we've become pariahs. And so I say, because there is a very the medical force is strong, the narrative is strong, and
It really
we've
is.
all bought into it. And it's really hard to get off of that. And I'm surprised you've been able. You don't live in California, I'll tell you that, because we become the vaccine apartheid state here. I'm embarrassed about where California has gone in terms of, I believe, hurting children. And you have to. I'll share one more thing, and I can get on a soapbox. I'm very passionate about these things.
Yeah.
Is there a study came out last year, looking at several practices? I think they studied almost 3,000 kids, and the kids in that practice were the healthiest, were the ones who were unvaccinated and breastfed. That's
Look
the
at
that's
that. Wow.
Wow. Those are my kids.
over partially vaccinated and fully vaccinated.
Right.
That's 3 groups they studied. So, and that's a study I can easily share with your listeners if you want. It's published, it's out there.
Yeah.
There's data out there. If people want data, they want data.
Right. And that it's also the trying, like you said earlier, about there's a narrative being manufactured behind closed doors and being promoted as a thing, sort of like the anti-vax word, the misinformation word, the fact checker words, all these different things that all they seem to do, these chunk of words that come out, are really to suppress a narrative, to suppress questioning, to suppress curiosity, concern, love for the child. All these things are purposely put there just to prevent that one thing. That to me is like, isn't anybody? Can you just see what's happening? It's only stopping one thing. People asking questions. I just saw a video today, George. I was going to tell you earlier, and I'll say it here. It was parents here in this district, and I'm in Nashville, Tennessee right now, and they were in a school board to try to get the masks off the kids. Now we're pretty open here. I don't wear masks anywhere, but the school system, because it's a government school system, still has the mask. So they said, okay, we're not gonna, on March 11th, we're gonna actually end the mask. So everybody was like, the parents were like, yay! However, the lady with the mask and like she's got like an apparatus. She's like, however, we're gonna revisit this on March 5th and see what the numbers are, and at that point we'll decide again. And so the whole room erupts like, boo, no, we're clearing out the room. Get the parents out of here. So the security came in. This is all on camera. Security
Wow.
came in and escorted all the parents of the children that go to this school out of the room. And people are saying, you communist, they're yelling. And I was like thinking, we homeschooled for a very long time, and we actually just came here and we put her in. She wanted to go to school. She's 11 years old. We felt, okay, we did a good job getting her to this point. I think you'll be okay for me. And she's doing great. She's doing really good in school. But that system just really aggravates me. And that to me is where that barrier that needs to be broken of that education has to be within these governmental organizations, or whatever, prisons or whatever you want to call them. But I think that the education really has to go there to raise awareness to the parents that do care, because these parents were there, they cared,
Right.
and they just don't have a lot of information that they can spit out, where they can actually get into battle. They yell, so it's not the right approach. Yelling in a room is just going to make you seem like you're just yelling in a room, and now you're considered a terrorist or whatever that they're deeming us now. But that to me is really where I think the education part of it has to go and be pushed into that area, into schools and teachers, and something that goes in there where where the teachers and the parents kind of have an idea already going in. Okay, this is not working. Here are the numbers. Here are the facts. Here's a study, like you said. You have all these studies out there. The data is there. How can we get that data into these schools? That's what scares me the most.
Right. No, it's right.
I'm listening to you speak, John, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this Regeneration Health International is I think we have to create another paradigm, because schools receive a lot of money from the federal government. And I'm pretty clear that the government is on a certain track right now. And I'm not sure, unless we get off that track, that whether we can work in that system. And this is new thoughts that I've had only because in the past few years and what's been going on, that it may be that we have to pull our kids out and create our own schools.
Yes.
And because there is, so for example, for every day that a kid is not in school, the school loses money. And some schools in my area were receiving money depending on their vaccine rates, that if they can show X percentage vaccine rate, they got more money.
Wow.
So there were all kinds of incentives going on that are, to me, just smell of collusion and obfuscation of truth and lack of visibility. This is not being transparent. So I'm thinking that whether a group of smart parents have to get together who would have similar values and have to educate our own children. I'm not sure we can. I hear what's going on. Like with the masking, for example, which is to me the worst thing we can do to children. There's all kinds of data now about that, but so we might be in for some real paradigm shifts.
Yeah, and actually today I had a conversation with someone about that. My wife is a teacher, and the conversation that they had with her and then they had with me today was, we're thinking of getting, but we have about 10 kids, 10 that we were going to do a school right next to our church. And she would actually be the teacher for the school, and the parents would come in and pay her salary, and they would actually do it. Yeah. So that was a conversation I was having today, and it is happening across the country. People are homeschooling. It's at an all-time high right now. We did the Classical Conversations program. We did the Applied Scholastics program. These programs are at record numbers right now for homeschoolers. So I think you're right that, and when they start losing dollars, that's really where you can really have some change.
Absolutely. And his wife is a teacher. My wife taught for 30 years in the New York City public school system.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And we've had conversations about it. And she would tell me all these things that were going on in the school. And even at that time when she was teaching, because she recently retired now, which she was telling me all these things about these parents that would bring the kids in. These kids were diagnosed with ADHD, all these types of things. They're on all these medications and stuff. And the parents are just like, don't even, there's no responsibilities, nothing. Okay, you have to take him, you have to figure it out. You as the teacher. And she even went so far as to tell me is there were many teachers in there that actually were like, we need to get that kid on medication. We need to get that kid on medication because it makes it easier for them so they can control their classroom.
Yeah,
And
put
I'm
'em-
like,
put 'em asleep.
holy, yeah, exactly. It's like, and you realize the mentality that goes on in these school systems. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so, right, because what's happening to our kids makes schools unmanageable. And so now
Right.
these teachers want
Right.
all the kids managed and medicated so they can teach their class. But if we don't correct the root cause, which is the underlying gut brain microbiome disorder and all the chemical toxins, those kids are not going to be better. They're going to be worse because half the classes now all have IEPs and diagnoses. It happened in my own kids' school when they were, and they're older now. When I went in the classroom as the parent, the room parent, I could diagnose half the kids in the classroom. I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
And that was already 15 years ago. My kids are in their 20s. So, and I'm thinking, this is not going to get better. It's actually getting worse because there are more kids now with anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, ADHD, and autism, and more. And all these disorders are up, up, up. And then parents who are already stretched out can't wait to go to the school and go, here, take my
Right.
Exactly.
and give me a 6-hour break.
Right.
This is a problem. Schools
Yes.
are not babysitting services. And so we need to really get to, and that's why I love integrative medicine. John, you mentioned functional medicine before, is we have to fix the root cause.
Mm-hmm.
And the root cause begins with their food and their gut. If that's not working, nothing else will.
Wow. Well, I feel like we can probably just have another hour or two of conversation on this.
Absolutely.
Well, we want to thank you so much. Now, you said you were working on. I'm very excited about what you're working on, as well as this book here, which I'm gonna, as soon as I'm done here, I'm gonna actually order this on Amazon. So pick up your copy because this is actually going to be a great opportunity to get some data, some actual workable data that's been tried by professionals. And here's the info. That's huge.
I run the website that you mentioned, www.gmoscience.org. We founded that in 2014. I'm the executive director, and that's a nonprofit just sharing stories about GMOs and pesticides and health. And I put up content monthly for that. The new one will be coming out on Regeneration International Health's website. And what I'm working on now, and I hope to get it out, I'm hoping by the end of the summer, is a workbook for parents. I'm going to have protocols on how to fix your kids with what you've got at home.
Oh, wow.
Cuando no hay doctor, when you don't have a doctor,
Right.
like me. And it's similar to the work I did many decades ago. I would go to Honduras, Central America, the places, and when there was no doctor. And I'm thinking, let's teach parents how to do again when there is no doctor. Better yet, let the parent become their family's doctor. And then you really only need health help when you're in deep doo-doo, like
Right.
with your son.
Right.
And then you need medical help for all the routine bumps and bruises and all the aches and the pains and the routine childhood stuff that we reinvigorate, re-empower parents, give them back the tools so they can do this for their families themselves. And with this workbook, which what I'm hoping to do is I'm going to do just that. And that's what that's what I'm working on. And it's not going to be perfect because there are things you can't get access to. And we simplified protocols, mostly using foods, herbs, and spices, and occasional a couple of other things.
I love it.
Amazing.
Cool, George.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, I commend you for doing this, number one, and helping parents to take control of their children's health. And also it helps parents themselves with their own health as well, because, and exactly, they take the control, they take the responsibility. And like I always say, people don't realize how much control they actually have over the health. And we need to get that education back to everyone.
If I have a second, can I share one quick?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is my favorite story. A family traveled 3 hours to come see me. They lived in a heavily industrial pesticide area near Modesto, tons of pesticides around them. The boy had autism. I was working with that. But the mom, father, the boy that I was working with, he was 5, and the little boy came. The dad only had 20% kidney function left. He was a truck driver. He was in his 30s. His mom and brother were already on dialysis. It's an awful existence being on dialysis. He had a kidney specialist at UCSF, a big medical center here in the Bay Area. I did stuff with the family, but I changed the family's diet to all organic, no gluten, no dairy for the son. The dad had to do the same diet. And he ate all organic. He came up gluten and dairy, just like did the exact son's diet. I put him on one of my typical autism diets. And the dad then began taking his food on all these long truck drives. He no longer stopped at the truck stops. 9 months later, he came back with a kid to see me. He had regained 80% of his kidney function.
Wow.
He went from being on the transplant list to having, and you can see it in his lab tests. This is measurable. It's demonstrable. He had 80% kidney function from 20%. He went to his kidney specialist at UCSF, and she told him, "What did you do?" And he said, "I went organic, and made some dietary changes." And she said, "Impossible. We must have misdiagnosed you."
Of course.
Of course.
Lab data charts this thing. It's on the computer now. But anyway, I love this story because he wasn't my patient. I only treated the son, and it just reflects on what you said, George.
Yes.
The dad got better.
Yes.
Just because I changed the family's diet.
And that's the power of that. That's the power, how it can actually translate. I mean, it can actually move on to even past that family to the family that lives right next door, because they have now this testimonial that they can actually share.
And eventually affect the future generations of that family through the epigenetics, right?
Absolutely.
So
that's right.
That's what we're trying to do. So
I had a doctor once. I was pre-diabetic. This was about 12 years ago. And I had a doctor check me out. He said, "Well, you got to, your grandmother was diabetic, your grandfather, chances are you're going to be that." So I was like, "All right, well, can I change my diet?" And he was like, I don't know. I mean, you can try. I don't know if that's going to be. So I went off and I did, I changed my diet, and it wasn't even that bad to begin with, but I made some other adjustments. Came back a year later, nothing, not one anything. Haven't had it since. He said, "Oh, well, we must have just made a mistake." When you said that, I was like, Doctor, and his name was Dr. Ramses Fakari. I'll never forget his name because I chose him only because I liked his name. Shows you how much I was paying attention.
So when people say you can't, I often say you can.
You can, absolutely. Well,
on that note,
yes, absolutely. Dr. Michelle
Perro,
thank you so much for being on with us. Really, really appreciate it. And make sure you keep tabs of all her upcoming work, because it's going to be amazing stuff to check out. So
yes,
thank you so much.
You so
really
much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Bye-bye.
Right. Good health.
Take care. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Wow. All right. Amazing. Well, that was amazing. Those are the kind of shows that really really just make us feel like we're doing such great work by bringing these important messages to you, the audience. And this is why, we have fun here. We talk about music and film dinner, but shows like this, man, this is what really is going to enhance film.
Yes.
It's going to enhance music. It's going to enhance life in general. And this is the kind of shows that I really want to.
Absolutely. And it just validates the path that we're on.
Exactly.
with everything that we're doing when it comes to health and nutrition and all these things. And, if we can help as many people as we can with this show, that's the goal. And have, like you said, have folks like her on it's incredible. So
fantastic. Whew. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We will see you again next time here on Counterparts. Thank you for joining us. For George Batista and myself, John Henry Soto, we'll see you. And as always, peace.